was about waterboarding, and Mitt couldn't say whether it was torture or not. Apparently, Casey doesn't know whether it was torture or not. John McCain said it was definitely torture and should not be. It's against the law. I just wondered, what's your position on waterboarding?
First of all, let me just preface this by I happen to be a supporter of John McCain's for any number of reasons.
I was impressed by his answer.
But I cannot say that per se waterboarding is torture. Because I'm not sure it fits the full definition of torture, number one. But number two, here's why I have a disagreement with John. John has said that we shouldn't use waterboarding, and he has talked about other types of intensive investigative techniques. But, he said, if it were a scenario where you had the lives of 3,000 Americans or 300,000 Americans in the balance, we would do what is necessary to get that information, and then we would figure out what to do afterwards. Here's where I disagree with that. I say that's how we would handle it, because what you're saying is you would force interrogators to use techniques that you say that generally are illegal, but under some circumstances we would allow it to happen because of the consequence of not gaining that information. I believe, as Professor Dershowitz does, with whom I don't agree on many things, that we ought to establish a rule that certain intensive investigative techniques are not to be allowed unless particular circumstances prevail, and that approval at the highest level, perhaps the president, be required. And he's even talked about perhaps we set up a board ahead of time to examine what circumstances that would be allowed. Now, I happen to think it is better if we say, under certain circumstances we will allow that to be done, then we ought to establish the terms in which that would be done and make it clear it's done only under extreme circumstances and spell those out. As opposed to what my friend and the person I'm supporting for president, John McCain, says, who says, no, it's illegal, but if we had that situation where someone had information that could lead to the destruction of 30,000 or 3,000 or 300,000 Americans, we would do what is necessary to get that information. I don't think that kind of uncertainty is appropriate. So I happen to think we ought to think about it ahead of time and decide that under certain circumstances we would allow certain things to happen. So I have a disagreement with John on that.
But he's the only one of everybody that's running that I'm aware of that's actually served in the military and spent time in captivity.
Well, not only did he spend time, but he was tortured.
Tortured.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. So I give him great credence on these things.
Right.
What I find is a difficulty with his conclusion that under certain circumstances we would do what is necessary. If that is true, then we ought to establish what those circumstances are ahead of time and not say that the individual at a lesser rank who's responsible for carrying out the interrogation does it at his or her peril. I don't think that's fair to that individual.